Here to help us analyze where the Democratic Party is in this race is Kerry Picket, the senior campaign reporter for the Washington Examiner. So, Kerry, we know that this week the big event that's taking place is the Republican National Convention. We've heard Republicans kind of give an idea of what they're going to say over the next couple of nights. But as far as Democrats go, what are they planning to do to kind of counter that narrative?
Well, I got to tell you, Alex, this is a very interesting thing because you do have a number of Democrats who were a little upset by the fact that Republicans were already criticizing them for the fact that the Democrats didn't talk about the whole issue of law and order last week. I actually did speak with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about that, and her response was something to the effect of, well, they have some nerve to be saying that because, here you have this administration is the whole height of criminality. They just had Steve Bannon get arrested. And, as far as we're concerned, we are looking to try to destabilize the situation that's going on the ground. So they're a little bit offended by that. And in fact, one of the first criticisms they already had to do with Donald Trump's speech that he already did earlier today. They said, well, hold on a second. We thought that the Republicans wanted to be optimistic. And there's Donald Trump complaining about the postal service. And there's Donald Trump saying that the Democrats are going to steal the election. Where exactly is the optimism? So that's where the Democrats are right now. And they're waiting to see where exactly the RNC convention is going to go.
And it is always interesting to see what happens, for example, outside of that very coveted 10-hour slot on the East Coast where all the different networks will be taking the speeches. In fact, we're hearing that President Trump will have a speech or at least a speaking opportunity during that 10 o'clock hour during all of this. But it was interesting, for example, last week when Hillary Clinton would give her speech at 9:50 and then, of course, 10 o'clock rolls around and then all the other networks start airing the convention. And that's really the message that they're trying to send out to the more broader electorate. So I think that's really what the message will be towards the end of the convention on each one of these nights. But when we're talking about the Democratic convention as well, here we are a couple days now after it. Did they get what they wanted overall out of that convention?
Well, keep in mind, of course, you had the Democrats doing this virtual convention. It's their first time doing such a thing. And, in fairness, they're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And ultimately, did they get a bounce out of it? Not really. Donald Trump apparently got a few points out of it, in fact. Right. But still, over in Delaware, a lot of people were kind of impressed with that kind of drive-in kind of theater thing. Because in the end, in any kind of convention, you want to reach a crescendo. But the Republicans, just by the fact that they're going second, they got to learn from what works and what actually didn't work with the Democrat virtual convention. And now we're going to see more of a live version of that. So let's see how that works. If this is going to be more of a sort of jazzed up sort of seasonal RNC meeting, or if it's going to be something that's going to be maybe a sort of a more depressed sort of virtual convention. Let's see where that goes.
And I think that's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on, not only from a messaging perspective, but also from the production perspective as well. Because, for example, during last week's DNC, you bring up the idea that it was very much so remote. The one this week will be remote as well. But the Democratic Party actually wanted to make that part of the messaging as well, saying the whole reason why we're doing this is because of this administration's response to the coronavirus pandemic. That's why, for example, Kamala Harris is talking into an empty room. That's why everybody's spaced out. That's why we're having these videos. Whereas the RNC, it looks like it wants to convey a little bit of a different message with its production as well. They do want to have some audiences in there. We've heard reporting that President Trump would like audiences in there. And then they want to kind of get the point across that they're ready to move on. They're ready to look at the next chapter coming out of the coronavirus pandemic and look to what comes happening in the next 4 years, assuming that they were to win the presidency. Do you think that's right?
Absolutely. And in fact, just a quick point there on the fact that Donald Trump wants people in the room. Even with his brief remarks today, the fact that he had a reaction to a lot of his remarks. Granted, they were delegates, they were national committee men, and they're national committee women, and there were still people who were hooting and hollering in this ballroom essentially. So anytime he would talk, it was kind of like a smaller version of a arena rally. So he would say something, he'd be like, woo! So that is essentially what was going on there. But to your original question there, as far as the coronavirus is concerned, he's going to talk about generally how he handled it, how and basically how the coronavirus came from another country, in this case China, and how the administration is going to handle it going forward, as opposed to how Joe Biden said how he would handle it, which is basically shut down the entire country and make sure that everybody wears a mask or else.
Right. And I think that what the Republicans will be pointing out is that's what he's saying now. But I know that they're going to reference, for example, his words very on when President Trump shut down travel to China, where Joe Biden said that it was a xenophobic action, where, for example, during that same time period, Nancy Pelosi was inviting people to come down to Chinatown. I know that's what the Republican Party is planning to do to counter that narrative by Democrats. But you bring up a very interesting point, and it's President Trump feeding off of a crowd. And that is something that I think everybody who has watched him knows that he does very well. And it, in fact, kind of invigorates him to some degree. I mean, whether it's at that rally that you were referencing, we've seen how much he enjoys those rallies, but also debates as well. I remember back in the 2016 debate, there was a lot of interaction. There were a lot of moments where, for example, President Trump said to Hillary Clinton, or you'd be in jail, or whatever it was, and the crowd started clapping, cheering, things of that nature. But there's a possibility that that facet will be absent from future debates or maybe even rallies as well. Do you think that that does play a role into the debate performance of the candidates?
Oh, absolutely. It's I think it's also it's a big reason why when you see baseball teams play with one another, I think it does sort of affect how they play when there's like nobody in the stands right now. So you've heard baseball players say, "Yeah, we like playing, but seeing like a bunch of cardboard cutouts doesn't really sort of jazz us up." Same thing with a political candidates. In this case, Donald Trump. He feeds off the crowd. He liked the fact that his fellow Republicans in the room were hooting and hollering, even if it's a small room. He still likes that. Whereas you have Biden, it's the complete reverse. His campaign is like, please, 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 keep it completely sanitized. We don't want anybody in the room. I mean, I would imagine that they would say, if we're going to debate, we're going to be sitting down at a desk. It's going to be completely sanitized, and there's going to be nobody in that room.
No, I think you're exactly right. And we already kind of got a preview of that to some degree, the last debate of the Democratic primary, when it was just Senator Bernie Sanders and just Joe Biden going up against one another. And a lot of people saying that Joe Biden held his own pretty well. A lot of people were expecting that one-on-one type of confrontation to be the time where maybe we see some cracks in his abilities to kind of deliver his argument, things of that nature. But he did come out of that on top. He did, of course, come into Super Tuesday and win the nomination outright. So I think that would work to Biden's advantage if that does seem to be the case. But I can tell you that this week they're going to start making arguments for why there can be audiences in the room, why America is ready to move on. I feel like that's going to be a big part of the messaging this week from the Republican National Committee. But Kerry, I really appreciate you coming on, previewing what we should see this week. There's going to be a lot of excitement. Thank you very much.